Okay, so studying in Europe, huh? That's pretty awesome. Can you imagine, like, walking through these super old cities,
Yeah.
getting coffee in a cafe that's, like, way older than America,
Yeah.
and you're working on a degree that, like, the whole world knows is good?
It's a dream for a lot of students, and there are good reasons for that, you know? Europe has this incredible history of, like, amazing schools. We're talking centuries, right? All these huge discoveries, big thinkers.
Whoa, yeah, that's pretty amazing to think about. Like,
Like,
studying physics where, like, Newton himself was,
mm,
or philosophy right in the city where Socrates debated all those years ago.
exactly. I mean, can you
Okay.
imagine?
Wow, I'm getting chills just thinking about it. Okay, but let's be real. You're probably thinking visas and stuff too, right?
Well,
And healthcare, figuring all that out in a new country. Oh, and maybe even learning, like a whole new language. You give us a ton of stuff to look at. How to adjust to student life in Europe, study abroad in Europe, pros and cons to consider, and there's even a YouTube video. Top 5 European countries Indian students should study in a GLA. So we're going to go deep on all this stuff.
yeah, and one thing that pops up from these sources is like how many different universities there are in Europe. You've got globally ranked places like in those QS World University rankings from 2023, and each country has its own system for higher education, which is interesting.
That makes sense. But those top-ranked universities, those must be, what, super hard to get into?
Well, yeah, they can be competitive, but that's why you got to do your research, you know?
Wow.
Understanding how to get in, the deadlines, what language tests you need, it's all really important.
Okay, so organization is key. Got it. But say you get in, right? You nail the application, you're accepted. Then what about the visa process? That seems like a lot.
It can seem overwhelming, yeah, but usually your university will help you through it. The main thing is starting early and having all the right documents. And speaking of documents, you know about the Schengen visa. That thing's a game changer for students over there.
Yeah, I saw that mentioned a few times, but I'm a little fuzzy on, like, what it actually is.
It's pretty cool, actually. It lets you travel to like 26 European countries without needing a separate visa for each one. So, like, you could spend a weekend in Paris, then head to Amsterdam, then Rome, all in one visa.
Wait, 26 countries? That's like a free travel pass? Amazing.
Exactly. It's a huge perk of studying in the Schengen area. But of course, you got to think about money too, right? Europe can be expensive, especially in the West.
Right, good point. And how to adjust to student life in Europe had some good tips about that.
Oh, yeah, like using student discounts. Lots of museums and cultural places have like free or cheaper tickets for students.
Oh, that's good to know. Got to save money where you can, especially if it means more money for those weekend trips all over Europe.
Yeah.
But got to be honest, one thing I'd be nervous about is like the language. How hard is that for students?
Yeah, that's where things get interesting. Your sources had a few different takes on that. Lots of programs are in English, especially for master's degrees. But even knowing a little bit of the local language can make like your daily life way easier.
Yeah, that YouTube video mentioned that, right? Some countries, like the Netherlands, are super English friendly, but then you've got places like France, where knowing French is basically uh, essential.
Exactly. And it's not just about getting by. Learning the language opens up so much more. You can talk to people, get the humor, you know, really experience the place, not just the touristy stuff.
Yeah, good point. It's about making the whole experience richer. And who knows? Maybe you'll discover you love learning languages.
Exactly. And speaking of new experiences, we should talk about something else that can be, well, tough, but also rewarding getting used to a new culture.
Culture shock, right, that's real.
Definitely. It's totally normal to feel a little out of place, homesick, even a little frustrated sometimes. You're in a new environment, new rules, even a different sense of humor, maybe.
I can only imagine. So what can you do to, like, make that easier and actually enjoy it?
Well, all your sources said building a support network is key.
Right, connecting with other students, people from your country, and locals. And I remember study abroad in Europe, pros and cons to consider. That joining student clubs is really good for that.
Yeah, it's great for meeting people who are into the same stuff as you, whether it's sports, debating, even cooking. It's about finding your thing and connecting with people.
I bet those connections lead to some pretty cool adventures too.
Speaking of adventures,
Yeah.
what about travel?
Okay, now things are getting exciting. Studying in Europe is like being right next to a ton of amazing places.
Exactly. Imagine like a weekend exploring the canals in Amsterdam. Then hop on a train, you're suddenly checking out the Colosseum in Rome. The possibilities are endless.
And remember that Schengen visa.
Huh?
It's like a superpower for travel.
For sure. But before we go to crazy planning trips, let's get back to the practical stuff for a sec. I was wondering about healthcare. How does that work for students studying abroad in Europe?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's got to be different than here.
It does depend on the country.
So you really got to research the healthcare system of whatever country you're going to.
Oh, definitely. Some countries have national insurance that covers international students. Others, you'll need to get private insurance. Usually, your university can help you figure all that out.
Okay, good to know. And speaking of help, I bet universities also have support specifically for international students, right?
Absolutely. Most universities have these offices just for international students. They do all kinds of stuff like orientation, helping with visas, even workshops on adjusting to the culture. They're a great resource, so definitely reach out to them if you need anything.
Great advice. Okay, so we've covered a lot in this first part of our deep dive. We talked about why Europe is so cool, all those different universities, the visa stuff and budgeting, and even how language and culture can be both a challenge and a super rewarding part of the experience.
And that's just the beginning. In part two, we'll look closer at those country-specific suggestions from that YouTube video, Top 5 European Countries Indian Students Should Study in EPIL. I think it could help you decide what's best for you.
Sounds good. We'll be back soon to break it all down. Until then, maybe start thinking about which European city you'd like to call home for a while.
All right, back to our deep dive on studying in Europe. So far, we've talked about the big picture stuff, what makes Europe so cool for students, the universities, and all those practical things. But you also gave us that YouTube video, Top 5 European Countries Indian Students Should Study in Europe. I think it's worth looking at what they recommend, because it might give you some ideas too.
Definitely. It's focused on Indian students, but I bet a lot of it applies to, like, anyone thinking about studying in Europe. So what was their top pick?
They put the Netherlands at #1, with Amsterdam being the main city they talked about. The video said it's really English speaking, which can definitely make things easier if you're like just getting there. Plus, it's got a high quality of life and tons of international companies, so you'd have good chances for a global career later on.
Amsterdam always seemed like a super open and welcoming place with lots of different cultures. But I think the video mentioned a downside too, right?
Yeah, the cost of living in Amsterdam can be pretty high, especially for housing. That's something to definitely consider when you're making your budget. And another thing, the video said that in the Netherlands, international students can only work part-time, like up to 16 hours a week.
That's less than some other European countries allow. So if you were thinking of working to help pay for things, that's something to, think about carefully.
Exactly, gotta weigh the pros and cons.
Okay.
Now, the video's second recommendation might surprise you. France. It's famous for, well, everything. Beauty, culture, those amazing universities. But maybe not the first place you think of for English-speaking students.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, who wouldn't want to study in Paris, the city of lights,
Yeah.
right? But yeah, the language thing could be a bit of a hurdle.
The video was pretty honest about that. They said that while there are some programs in English, especially for master's degrees, if you really want to thrive in France academically and socially, learning French is pretty important.
Makes sense. You want to be able to actually talk to people, figure out daily life, and really, get the culture, not just scratch the surface. So maybe brush up on your French before you go, or plan to take some intensive language courses when you're there.
Now, for something a little different, let's talk about a country that's known for, well, its strong economy and those high-quality engineering programs, Germany. The video talked about how good the job market is there, especially if you're in, like, a STEM field. And get this, tuition at public universities is almost free for everyone, even international students.
Whoa, almost free. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Germany sounds like a pretty sweet deal, but I'm guessing there's some challenges too.
Well, the video mentioned a couple of things. First, kind of like France, learning German is a good idea, especially if you're thinking of staying in Germany after you graduate. It'll open up more job opportunities and help you, become a part of things more easily.
Right. It's not just about the degree. It's about the whole experience of living there.
Exactly. And second, the video said that applying to German universities can be a bit bureaucratic, lots of paperwork, and it's pretty competitive too. Plus, for students from India, there's this extra verification process, which can make things a bit more complicated.
So it's not super easy, but if you're organized and keep at it, it could be totally worth it. Okay, I'm curious about the other countries they mentioned.
The video also talked about Sweden, which is known for being, well, just beautiful, all that nature, high quality of life, and they've got those really progressive social policies. Plus, lots of people in Sweden speak English really well, which can make things easier for international students.
I always heard amazing things about Sweden. They always rank super high on those global happiness surveys, right?
Totally. But the video did say there are a couple of potential downsides. First, it can be pretty expensive to live there, even if you're not in a big city. And second, the winters are long and dark, especially the further north you go.
So if you're someone who, like, thrives on sunshine and long summer days, maybe Sweden isn't the best choice. But hey, if you love cozy winters, maybe it's perfect. Okay, what was the last country they talked about?
They briefly mentioned Ireland, and they highlighted the great universities there, the fact that pretty much everyone speaks English, and that it's a good investment for students, meaning you're likely to get a good return on your education investment.
Interesting. Ireland sounds like it could be kind of a hidden gem for international students.
Definitely worth looking into more, yeah. It's cool to see how each of these countries offers this like unique mix of what's good and what's maybe a little more challenging.
Totally. And I think it's important to remember that this YouTube video is just one perspective, right?
Oh, for sure. It's a great place to start, but you got to do your own research too, think about what you want, and maybe even talk to people who studied in these countries to get the inside scoop.
Yeah, hearing from someone who's actually been there is super valuable. They can tell you all about it, like from finding a place to live to uh, understanding the culture.
Speaking of culture, let's shift gears a bit and talk about something that's often overlooked but super important, the social and cultural stuff, going beyond just being a tourist.
You mean like really experiencing the local way of life?
Exactly. It's about pushing yourself out of your comfort zone, seeing things from different perspectives, and maybe even like questioning some of your own assumptions.
Sounds exciting, but also a little intimidating, to be honest. So how can students really make the most of that cultural immersion?
Well, all your sources said the same thing. Be proactive. Don't just wait for things to happen. Go out and look for ways to connect with people, explore, and really get the most out of the experience.
So like join a local sports club,
Yeah,
volunteer somewhere, even just start conversations with people at a cafe.
exactly. And don't be shy about asking questions. Most people are happy to share about their culture, especially if you show you're genuinely interested.
Okay, that's good advice. But I imagine, even if you're trying your best, there might be times when you feel a bit lost or homesick. It's a big change, after all.
Oh, definitely. And that's where having a good support network is so important.
Right. We talked about that before, connecting with other students, both from your country and from the country you're studying in. But what about staying in touch with your family and friends back home? How important is that?
It's definitely important. These days, staying connected is easier than ever. Video calls, texting, even just sharing pictures and videos of what you're doing can help a lot. It helps with the distance and reminds you that you've got people rooting for you back home.
That's good to hear. It's like having a little piece of home with you wherever you go. But at the same time, it's important to be present in your new environment and really take it all in, right?
Absolutely. It's about finding that balance between staying connected to your roots and, branching out to explore these new horizons. And speaking of exploring, I think it's time we got back to one of the most exciting parts of studying abroad, the travel.
Yes. Back to those travel dreams. Remember we were talking about the Schengen visa and how it basically unlocks all of Europe for you. But with so many incredible places to see, where do you even start?
That's the best part. You get to create your own adventure. Do you
Right.
picture yourself like wandering through those old streets in Prague? Or maybe checking out the Colosseum in Rome? Or how about soaking up the sun on a Greek island? It's all up to you.
Okay, now I'm getting serious wanderlust. But before we get too carried away, I do remember one of your sources mentioned a potential downside to all this travel.
Yeah.
Something about being tempted to travel every weekend and maybe missing out on really experiencing your local area.
That's a good point. It's easy to get caught up in like checking off all the famous tourist spots,
Mm.
but it's also important to, enjoy those everyday moments in the city or town where you're living.
So maybe find a balance between those big weekend trips and finding the cool stuff right in your own backyard.
Exactly. Get to know your neighborhood, find your favorite cafe, maybe even join a local hiking group or volunteer somewhere. It's about making those real connections, the kind you don't get as a tourist.
That's great advice. It's about building a life there, not just a travel itinerary.
And that brings us to another important part of studying abroad, personal growth. It's not just about school and travel, it's about who you become during that time.
Yeah, all your sources talked about that, how stepping outside your comfort zone and taking on new challenges can really change you.
Exactly. It's about becoming more resilient, independent, being able to adapt to new situations and just having a wider view of the world.
So it's an investment in yourself, not just in your education.
Exactly. And those skills and experiences, they'll stick with you long after you're back home. They'll help you in your career, your relationships, even just in how you see the world.
This is all super inspiring. But I gotta be honest, as much as I love the idea of studying abroad, I'd be a little nervous about the challenges too. Being away from home, figuring out a new culture, and maybe even hitting some bumps along the way.
That's completely normal. It's a big step, and it makes sense to feel a bit apprehensive. But I think the main takeaway from all your sources is this: be prepared, but also be open to the unexpected.
So do your research, get organized, but also be ready for those detours and those moments where things just happen unexpectedly.
Exactly. Those unexpected moments are often the ones you remember most, the ones that really change you.
This has been such a great conversation. We've covered so much why Europe is so cool for students, all the practical stuff, and how it could really change you, help you grow. I'm feeling inspired already.
And we're not done yet. In our last part, we'll sum up everything we've learned and give you some food for thought as you plan your own European adventure.
Sounds good. We'll be back soon to wrap things up and send you on your way with hopefully some new knowledge and a whole lot of excitement for what's ahead. Okay, so we're back for the final part of our European Study Abroad deep dive. We've covered a ton already, from those amazing old universities to like the practical stuff like visas and money, and of course all the travel you can do with that Schengen visa. But before you start packing your bags, let's take a minute to go over some of the key things we've learned from all these awesome sources you gave us.
Yeah, let's kind of bring it all together and see what we've got.
One thing that really stuck with me is just how many different experiences you can have in Europe. It's not like a one-size-fits-all continent, right? Each country, each city even, has its own like personality and vibe.
That's so true. We talked about how the Netherlands is super English friendly and has a great quality of life, but it's also more expensive and you can't work as many hours part-time. Then there's France with all that history and culture, but you really got to learn French to like fully experience it.
Right. And Germany, with their strong economy and those like practically free tuition fees, sounds amazing, especially for anyone going into a STEM field. But you got to be ready to learn German and deal with, maybe some complicated paperwork.
And don't forget those cool Nordic countries like Sweden.
Yep.
Super beautiful, really progressive, but also those long winters and, yeah, a higher cost of living. And then there's Ireland, which people don't always think about, but it has great schools and everyone speaks English. It really shows that you got to do your research and pick the place that, like, matches what's important to you.
Exactly.
You
There's
know?
no best country, just the best one for you. Right.
Yeah.
So think about what matters most: the language, the culture, how much things cost, what the job market's like after you graduate. And don't be afraid to reach out to people who've actually studied in those countries. They can give you the real scoop.
Talking about Real Scoop, remember that YouTube video, Top 5 European Countries Indian Students Should Study in Histories? Even though it was made for Indian students, it had some really good general advice about choosing where to study.
Yeah, like how important it is to weigh the good and bad stuff. Think about your money situation, how much of the language, even if you can handle, different weather and cultural things.
Exactly. It's about finding that perfect spot where, like, your goals for school, what you're interested in personally, and all the practical stuff kind of come together.
So besides picking the right country, what else did we learn from all this? What advice would you give to someone who's like just starting to think about studying abroad?
Well, one thing all your sources said is to be proactive. Don't just wait for things to happen. Go out and look for ways to connect with people, explore, and really make the most of it.
So join those student clubs, volunteer, chat with locals, just like put yourself out there.
Exactly. And remember, studying abroad isn't just about the classes. It's about growing as a person. Don't be afraid of challenges. Try new things and let the whole experience change you. In a good way, of course.
Something that really stood out to me was how important it is to build a support system. Connect with other students, people from your country and locals, and keep in touch with your family and friends back home. But also, don't be afraid to ask for help from your university.
Those international student offices are there to help you. They can give you advice on everything from visa problems to, like, adjusting to the culture and even finding a place to live.
Okay, so be proactive, build a support network, and be open to growing as a person. Any other words of wisdom before we finish up?
Well, remember, travel is a huge part of studying abroad, but don't let it take over everything else. Find a good balance between those weekend trips and actually like living in the city where you are. Get to know your neighborhood, find your favorite spots, make a life there, not just a travel itinerary.
That's a great point. It's about finding that balance between seeing the world and making your temporary home feel like, well, home.
And lastly, remember that studying abroad is a journey, not just a destination. There will be challenges, you'll hit some unexpected bumps, but there will also be amazing discoveries, connections you make, and ways you grow as a person. Just embrace it all.
So do your research, get organized, but also be open to, things not going exactly as planned. Embrace the unknown, and most importantly, have fun. This is your chance to create something that's totally unique to you, an experience that will stay with you long after you're back home.
It's an investment in yourself, your future, and how you see the world.
Wow, this deep dive has been incredible. I feel like we've only just scratched the surface of everything Europe has to offer students, but hopefully we've given you some good insights and got you excited about your own study abroad adventure.
Remember, Europe is this amazing mix of cultures, languages, and experiences, just waiting for you to discover them. So go out there, be curious, and make it unforgettable.